with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, January 27th, 2025. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live, steps, from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Ståle Holgersen, author of Against the Crisis, Economy and Ecology in a Burning World. And later in the program, Hanno Hauenstein will be with us to talk about Germany's far right, AfD, and Elon Musk's endorsement of them. Also on the program on Friday, the Senate voted to confirm Pete Hegseth and Kristi Noem. Mitch McConnell joined Susan Collins and Murkowski to vote against Hegseth. Welcome to the resistance, Mitch McConnell. On the same night, Trump fired multiple independent federal watchdogs to purge the government of anyone who may restrain him. Immigration raids are escalating across the country. Indigenous communities in the Southwest report being harassed during immigration sweeps. Trump issues deportation quotas for ICE, supposedly unhappy with the fact that they haven't deported more people immediately. He wants 1,200 to 1,500 a day. Colombia rejected U.S. military planes carrying deportees on humanitarian grounds. And because Trump wanted his photo op of immigrants in shackles on military planes, he threatens Colombia with sanctions. Tens of thousands of Palestinians returned to northern Gaza after 15 plus months of displacement. Trump backs the ethnic cleansing of Gaza to the glee of Smotrich and Israel's far right, and lifts Biden's hold on 2,000-pound bombs for Israel. Trump also reinstates an anti-abortion executive order barring federal funds to any overseas health organization that mentions abortion. The US-based AI stock market plunged this morning over fears about Chinese AI investments. The Washington Post finds that rent in LA County soared 20% in the aftermath of the fires, which is supposed to be illegal. But in completely connected news, home sales last year hit a 30-year low. People can't afford to buy homes.
Well, it's not like we have a need for housing in this country.
Yep. In Germany, Elon Musk spoke virtually to the AfD party and encouraged them to forget about past guilt. We'll talk about that in a bit. And lastly, South Korea's impeached President Yoon, now indicted on insurrection charges. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. It's actually not an Majority Report Thursday. It is a Fun Day Monday. Not so fun, but it will be once we get, I texted Sam, how did that Jubilee thing go? Haven't heard back. I am curious how it went. I'm sure it went very well, but he was out doing that. It's like the Jubilee time debate thing. I've only seen a few of those segments, but
like 1 versus 20 or something like
that. We'll see. I'm excited to see how Sam did. I'm sure he did well. He will be back tomorrow. So let's get into this here. We'll be talking to Hanno in a bit about the really disturbing developments from over the weekend of the world's richest man being Henry Ford in more ways than one, speaking to the German far-right party and meddling now in both the UK and German elections. But this was very important. Over the weekend, Trump spoke to reporters on Air Force One about Gaza, about what the plan is, the day after plan that we've been hearing about since this genocide began. The entirety of the Gaza Strip almost is entirely destroyed. The United Nations estimates that 92% of homes in Gaza are either destroyed or damaged. So what's next? This is Trump speaking to reporters about what will happen to the folks in Gaza.
I'm talking to General El-Sisi tomorrow, sometime I believe. And I'd like Egypt to take people, and I'd like Jordan to take people. I mean, you're talking about probably 1.5 million people, and we just clean out that whole thing. It's, you know, it's over the centuries that's had many, many conflicts that site. And I don't know, it's something has to happen, but it's literally a demolition site right now. Almost everything's demolished, and people are dying there. So I'd rather get involved with some of the Arab nations and build housing in a different location where they can maybe live in peace. Temporarily, or would they could be either. Could be temporarily, could be long term.
Could be temporary, could be long term, if you heard him at the end, basically speaking about the displacement of people in Gaza. You know, Smotrich responded to these comments, one of the far-right ministers in Israel, with immense glee, saying that it's an excellent idea and such an innovative solution, Mr. Trump, President Trump, King Trump, if you will.
It's what they've wanted to do for a long time.
What is fair to say is that Donald Trump is just putting words to the actions that the Biden administration already undertook. The reason that this small strip of land is so valuable is, like, Trump talks about it being a waterfront property where they can build luxury condos. That's a part of it. But for the Israelis, they wanted to make the environment in Gaza so inhospitable to human life that it would force the people of Palestine to forget their homeland. And when you see the images of the tens of thousands of Palestinians returning to Gaza City in the north today, you can see that no matter how much blood they spill, that memory and that desire to return home is still there. But the problem here is that Donald Trump is going to be responsive only really to the will of the Israelis. That $100 million that Miriam Adelson poured into his campaign is going to probably be a major factor here, as well as giveaways to his real estate developer buddies, including potentially his son-in-law, to make, I don't know, a Trump casino or something like that, and build it upon the skulls of dead Palestinian children in Gaza. But the reason that he's even able to make this case and that this could actually happen, let's be clear, is because the Biden administration greenlit this genocide that could be the step that precedes the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians fully from the Strip.
I mean, Blinken literally floated this privately. You know, what's happening is they're selling a very similar policy to two different audiences. And so Trump's going to, 2,000 pound bombs, which like that was the one break that Biden put on Israel is just a joke, pointless. Right. But the Blinken wanted to ask Egypt and Jordan to take refugees permanently too. And it's, you know, everyone points out how it rhymes with the sort of Nazi view of Jewish people during World War II. This thing you hear from Zionists and defenders of Israel saying nobody wants them either. Nobody want them either. But one thing that's a little bit different is that those countries know that if they accepted a bunch of refugees and any intelligence got back to Israel that some of those people that you ethnically cleansed and did a genocide to, that they have some they're like Hamas or something, then Egypt and Jordan know that Israel's going to start bombing them too.
Yeah, right. It's not just that. That's a great point. It's not just the destabilizing nature of having to take in millions of people. I mean, the Trump administration is currently operating an effort to mass deport people who are here, sometimes legally, sometimes without the proper documentation. It doesn't necessarily matter, saying we can't take on these many people. We can't do it. Yeah. But at the same time, the Arab countries, they'll take the other Arabs because in his racist view of the Middle East, there's no such thing as Palestinian. So this is his vision of might makes right. It doesn't necessarily matter. No attempt at any consistency here. Jordan and Egypt, just take all these people because Israel doesn't want them. We don't want them, whatever. And Israel needs to make its buffer zone permanent.
Yep. And take a look at the Democrats that supported the Lake and Riley Act, and just pick one at random and see if they took money from AIPAC or DMFI. Mm-hmm. I would suggest that you'd be hard pressed to find more than one that didn't. People have a right not to be displaced from their homes. I think this is like a bit of the public education that this genocide has kind of forced upon people. When we talk about colonialism, and I think, younger people in the West begin to understand what it means, this forced displacement is extremely traumatizing and immoral in so many ways outside of just the genocide of it all. Like, people have a right to put their roots down where they need to make a better life for themselves. And you can see it in both this effort to deport so many people and in the way that Trump so cavalierly talks about ethnically cleansing over 1 million Palestinians that remain in the Gaza Strip, is that you do not have a right to safety and to home. You do not have a right to put your roots down and to stay where you want to and live where you want to. That is the right of the West and of white capitalists, basically. And so that is the kind of ideological through line between those two things. Before we get to our next guest, where we'll be talking a little bit about the term crisis and what it means under capitalism, a word from one of our sponsors, one of our favorites, Nutrafol. You know that your hair is just so much more than what you see when you look in the mirror. From stress and nutrition to hormones and lifestyle, there are so many internal factors that affect what you see on the outside. With Nutrafol's science-backed whole-body approach, nourish growth from within and achieve your best hair yet. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement brand trusted by over 1 million people. See thicker, stronger, faster-growing hair with less shedding in just 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol. Thinning hair is different for men and women, so a one-size-fits-all approach to hair growth doesn't cut it. Nutrafol has multiple formulas for men and women that are tailored to different life stages, such as postpartum or menopause, and lifestyle factors, such as a plant-based lifestyle, so you can get just what you need. Now, I had a female friend who had like a pretty severe health issue in her 20s. Nutrafol, she basically swears by it because she lost some of her hair during that period, and she was able to have it grow back. And Sam speaks very highly about it for the men's formula. So his and hers, it works out very well. Physician formulated with 100% drug-free ingredients, Nutrafol supports healthy hair growth from within by targeting key root causes of thinning: stress, hormones, aging, nutrition, lifestyle, metabolism through whole body health. While many supplements rely solely on ingredient studies, Nutrafol clinically tests final formulations to ensure their efficacy. In a clinical study, 72% of men saw more scalp coverage after taking Nutrafol men's hair growth supplement for 6 months, and 86% of women saw improved hair growth after taking Nutrafol as a women hair growth supplement for 6 months. With a Nutrafol subscription, building a hair growth routine is simple. Purchase online, no prescription required. Automated deliveries and free shipping keep you on track. Plus, you can save up to 20% off. You can save up to 20% off, and you'll have access to free naturopathic doctor consults, and Headspace membership is included.
Start your hair growth journey with Nutrafol. For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com and enter promo code TMR. Find out why over 4,500 healthcare professionals and stylists recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code TMR. That's Nutrafol.com, promo code TMR. All right, quick break, and when we come back, we'll be with Ståle Holgersen. We are back, and we are joined now by Ståle Holgersen, senior lecturer in human geography at Stockholm University, author of Against the Crisis, Economy and Ecology in a Burning World. Ståle, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So, how do you define crisis? Specifically, why did you feel as well that you wanted to make clear your definition of crisis and how it fits into capitalism compared to previous definitions of crisis?
Yeah, so when working with crisis, the first thing that's immediately will strike you is that as people are using it all over the place. And it's used, especially now, it's used for absolutely everything. And if that's the case, it will within a few years necessarily again lose its significance and disappear as a concept. And this way of using it as a hype, I don't believe in it. I think it's problematic analytically and politically. So I insist on having a definition. And I have a definition in the book, and people might disagree with my definition. But then again, at least we can have a disagreement. Without the definition, we can only have a confusion. And I prefer disagreements to confusions. So my definition would be something like this, or it would be like this. Inspired, of course, by very much inspired by others. Like when Bob Jessop speaks about symptomatology, that crises are symptoms of something underlying. Or when the French philosopher Daniel Ben Said speaks about paroxysm, which is a sudden outbreak of a known disease. So in both these approaches, there's something happening at the surface related to something below somehow. Okay, so my definition will be something like this, that a crisis will be some kind of turning point, necessarily building on three components. First, it needs to be an event happening relatively quickly. Second, this event needs to be embedded in underlying structures and relations. And third, it needs to have negative consequences for humans or animals or nature or something. Without the first one, without the event, we can have all kind of permanent problems. Without the second one, embedded, We can have all things happening by chance. And without the third one, we can have stuff that's theoretically then, hypothetically, good for everyone. I need to be ruled out of the definition. So it's a fairly broad definition, but it comes with certain limits. Everything is not a crisis. Crises are never permanent, and they will come and they will go. And it's also, of course, this definition will insist on the fact that crises must be understood both as events and underlying structures. I think there is of course, tendency among many of us on the left to mainly focus on the core of the system, the core of the problems, the real underlying cause of something, which is very important theoretically, but very limiting when it comes to actually doing policy about it, because then the event is so extremely important. So that would be my starting point, just insisting on these two levels, which also means we can never have a purely empirical analysis of a crisis, and we can never have a purely philosophical discussion about it. It's always both the empirical and the theoretical working in every single crisis.
So practically, what would be an example of, say, an event that is destabilizing, but maybe not a crisis?
So if something falls from the sky and smashes into a city and kills 100,000 people, that would be a catastrophe, not necessarily a crisis. It would not be a crisis. It would be a catastrophe. But if there was some kind of political problems already going on, that could lead to a political crisis. It could lead to an economic crisis, but the meteorite or whatever it is smashing into the city in itself is not a crisis, for example. And same with wars. Wars are not crises. Wars are wars. Crises are crises. Crises might lead to wars, and vice versa sometimes maybe, but they are two separate things. But in 2020, so people are so obsessed saying crisis, suddenly people say the war in Ukraine crisis, just because people these days add crisis to everything.
Yeah. So is your concern that when crisis is overused, that it removes the intentionality of the systems that create said crises?
Yes, that's one thing, absolutely. I think that's a huge problem. And it's overused. And also, another thing with the crisis phenomenon, that when looking at these two levels, at the event and as an underlying structure, we can also see how the crisis shakes up the world at a certain level and stabilizes it at another. So capitalism lives through these crises. So it lives through shaking up the world at the surface level, while this shaking is stabilizing the system overall. And this is, I think, a very core part of understanding crisis, how crises reproduce capitalism. And I think so there's two main things in the book. The one thing is the two main approaches. One approach is how capitalism produces crisis. And from this perspective, we see how crises are produced through the internal contradictions in capitalism. The system looks fragile. It looks weak. It looks like it's falling apart. It's incredibly how many problems it's causing by itself. And what only focus from this perspective, how crises are created, no wonder people come up with the conclusion that the next crisis will be the fall of capitalism. But if we change perspective and we look at how crises are solved, we see something extremely different. We see the world from we see the same phenomena, the crisis, but from an extremely different perspective. If we see how crises are solved and how capitalism is reproduced through crisis, one crisis after the other, it's stunning how flexible the system is, how resistant it is, how it seems to be able to adapt to any major changes. And from that perspective, it seems almost impossible to see the capitalism going under. But I insist in the book to look from both these perspectives.
And is this, would it be fair to say that this is a differentiation and building off of Naomi Klein's definition of the shock doctrine, which is just basically that a crisis is not necessarily just exploited by capitalists to make money, but it's something that is also created by capitalism, exploited by capitalism, and then also something that reaffirms capitalism?
Yes. Yeah, okay. Absolutely. I'm a big fan. I'm allowed to say that. And of course, also I write this in the book. She has this argument during neoliberalism, how the capitalist core used the rest of the world, used crisis to rule the rest of the world. I see this general phenomena is broader. It's not only neoliberalism, it's in the system itself of capitalism. There's tendency to those who already have economic, political, ideological, military power to be able to use shocks as events, a crisis as events. And this is a general tendency within capitalism. We see it both in economic and also ecological crisis. So yeah, it's absolutely building on that.
So is there an imagined scenario in which a crisis could be created under capitalism, but then turned on its head and used as a way to exert, say, like worker power? That's a much rarer scenario, right? But it's one that could theoretically happen even under your definition.
Yes. And that's the main aim of the book. That's why I wrote the book. And that's my, that should be our historical mission as leftists in the 2020s to falsify my book in this respect. So the main tendency is that capitalism is reproduced through crises, one crisis after the other. That's the main tendency. It's not an iron law, it's a tendency. And our historical mission, not least concerning climate change, which is a massive ecological crisis, is to make an historical exception to this rule. And that's cannot be overstated how important that is. I think socialists and leftists we lack serious thinking about how to deal with crisis. When they come, we're always shocked and surprised, and we go directly into trying to figure out the underlying causes for it. But we also need crisis policies on a socialist respect, and that's underdeveloped, to be honest, politically and theoretically. And that's why so many on the left run to reformism and in Europe into Keynesianism as soon as there is a crisis, ecological or economic. There's no such thing as a socialist, proper socialist relation to crisis. And that's one of the things I'm trying to write or trying to move towards in the book, at least. Yeah.
Can you expand on that? What vision you think for a Marxist or socialist reaction to crisis would be in a more constructive way? Like, is the critique that perhaps it's like a almost reflexive harm reduction reaction to crises as opposed to thinking more broadly?
That's of course a very good question, and the what to do question, I come towards it, I start discussing it, but my discussion of course becomes quite general in this respect, which it needs to be, in the sense that a Marxist approach to crisis needs to be, or a socialist approach to crisis, I should say, needs to be based on local demands, local understanding of local problems, etc. So it doesn't make sense to sit anywhere in the world to call out the general strategy. But I do have some thoughts. Absolutely. And here, for example, speaking about Naomi Klein mentioned implicitly in shock doctrine and explicitly in Doppelganger that when there is a crisis or a pseudo crisis or some kind of conspiracy, we should stay calm. Stay calm. Don't driven into this the madness of it. And that's understandable if there is just like a conspiracy or in some cases. But as political strategy, I don't believe in staying calm. Crises are not only discourses, they're also actual phenomena, killing people losing their jobs, people losing their homes. As political strategy, staying calm doesn't work. We should rather work with a different, speaking about Naomi Klein here, a different concept from Klein, and we should have some kind of socialist shock doctrine. We need to have a socialist creative destruction. And this needs to be articulated before the crisis, so we know approximately what to do. The problem is we can never know exactly what the next crisis will look like. With ecological crisis, it's easier. With economic crisis, always hard. But even though we cannot know exactly what it looks like, we know something will happen. We know the next crisis will be a class struggle. Of course, it's always hidden behind rallying around a nation and and trying to do the best for a nation in terms of as soon as there's crisis, nationalism comes back. But that always hides class relations. We also know from every single crisis that I've seen in the last 200 years in capitalism comes with racism. As soon as there is crisis, there is racism. That is the explanation coming from the far right or the center, one way or the other. Either blame these people or those people, racism will come. And we can know that already now. When the next crisis comes, there will come racism. And just knowing that and start thinking about what to do about that before it hits, I think is a massive benefit. And then we can start in terms of creative destruction. What kind of industries do we want to destroy, so to speak? How can we destroy maybe some kind of sectors, be crypto, be fossil sector, or whatever you hate, in the next economic crisis? How can we attack that? If we know the next crisis is a class struggle, how can we directly start blaming for those actually causing the crisis, which are those accumulating capital? So I don't have all the answers here by far, but my book is at least starting up these kind of discussions to have a proper discussion of what can we do apart from directly running to the center as soon as there is some kind of turbulence.
Do you worry that at a certain point capitalism is so almost omnipresent or central in our structures that the distinction about crises perhaps can be overwhelming in terms of people's reaction to them, because it's almost as if if something fell from the sky, that would be a catastrophe, but not a crisis. But short of that, I can't. It's difficult for me to even imagine a catastrophe, perhaps an earthquake, but the reaction to that would have been be a crisis, because an earthquake isn't. That's more of a naturally or a volcanic eruption or something like that. Do you find that disaggregating that provides clarity, or just do you think that there's also a piece of this where it's so embedded in our structures that it's almost it can be a distinction without difference in some instances?
Yeah, of course. My definition is okay, like this. So Greta Thunberg says that important to call that it's important that the world leaders call the climate catastrophe for a crisis, the crisis that it is. The implication here is, of course, that crisis is a powerful word. If we only call it crisis, then we understand how serious it is, and then the leaders will need to react. I understand that, of course. And the same, I'm working with housing, a lot of the housing question, and the concept of housing crisis is everywhere. And of course, I also understand that if you live in poor housing conditions, I understand that this is easy to cry out for. This is a housing crisis. Look, we need to do something. So politically, that might do the job, even though poor housing conditions is not necessarily a crisis. It can be something just permanent, often is permanent in way of organizing housing under capitalism. In terms of Greta, then, if the leading politicians would treat it as a crisis, as in conventionally treat crisis, they would use it to reproduce their own power. Yeah. So that's kind of the problem with climate crisis, to be honest, is that it's a crisis as well. Yeah. But can I say one more thing? Because today everybody is obsessed with the concept of crisis. I think we should be a little bit careful and zoom out on that. And the concept of polycrisis, I want to say something about that in particular, because it's a little bit political relevance today, is everywhere. And it's coming from above. The world leaders are talking about polycrisis. And this is I think it's a little bit dangerous. Let's do a contrast between the 2010s and the 2020s. It's a massive difference. So during 2010s, after the crisis 2008, leading politicians all over the world did whatever they could in order for there not to be any crisis. And do everything they could in order to save the economic system after 2008. So what was it? Quantitative easing, lower interest rates, even higher housing prices, some financial regulation to save the rest of it, and so forth. The contrast to 2020 is just amazing to 2020s. So at that time, the politicians did whatever they could to avoid speaking about crisis. If you now go 10 years later, go to any meeting in Davos or go to any top meeting, they speak about polycrisis. They speak about crisis everywhere. And I think that's just quite dangerous, because that also means that people with power are ready to use crisis to change the world. And that might, of course, be dramatic in a certain sense, and might be catastrophic when it comes to people like Donald Trump, etc.
And in terms of where we are, the polycrisis piece that you described, or I guess perhaps it's a way to zoom out and talk a little bit about the level of speculation in our global markets at this level. Do you see the risk of crisis exploitation or / creation and that cycle exceeding even past exploitative kind of crisis responses, just because there's so much wealth concentration and we're at a level, it feels like, where you mentioned crypto earlier, there's so much speculation for speculation's sake that it's almost like this entire other casino capitalist marketplace that exists just to destabilize the rest of us, and it feels difficult to know where to attack it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as the ruling class are the ones exploiting crisis the most historically, it's even more dangerous knowing that Donald Trump is in office. And I think that might be a reason for hoping not for economic crisis next 4 years or 8 years, unless we start preparing for what to do before the next crisis hit, so to speak. But
right,
giving the one more thing to say about this, one more thing about polycrisis before we move on. I think it's also not only political problem, but an analytical useless concept. One, there's no definition of crisis there. The content of polycrisis, if you see what people use in it, is absolutely everything, from terrorism to IT security to climate catastrophe. Second, it tells us nothing about relations between the crises. In the polycrisis talk, it's only relations on surface level, how one effect of a crisis impacts something else. We never go down to see the structures causing crisis in the first place. But on the future, I think there's the difficult things with crisis. There's hard to grasp, but there's few things with crisis that makes them hard to understand as concepts. One thing, especially economic crisis, extremely complex. Second, trying to learn from previous ones always fools you, because future look a little bit different. So when we think about crisis today, I think we are obsessed with the 20th century. And it's hard to get out of it. We are kind of trapped in the 20th century. We're thinking about crisis. So what was distinct with the 20th century was that there was a very, very sharp beginning and end of the Fordist regime of accumulation. So what we today call Fordism has a distinct beginning and a distinct end. That's why so many of us in 2008 was thinking like, okay, this is also this distinct breaking point, which comes with a new form of capitalism. Something after neoliberalism. So people start talking about interregnum, like this period between regimes of accumulation, and this interregnum seemingly never ends. And I think we should try to stop learning too much from the 20th century. Don't be fooled too much from the 20th century. The fact that the 20th century had distinct starting and end points with Fordism doesn't mean that neoliberalism has a distinct end point in the same way. So I think the relation between neoliberalism and what you today see in the US, God knows what it is, can be much more blurry. So we saw a few weeks ago there when Trump became president, all these IT oligarchs, which used to be neoliberals, standing in line applauding him, of course. And these are just the blurring lines which will go in a certain direction, but not as fast, I think, as we saw in the 20th century.
Well, I really appreciate your time today, Ståle Holgersen. The book is called Against the Crisis, Economy and Ecology in a Burning World. Thanks so much. We'll put a link to your book down below wherever people are listening to or watching this. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. All right, folks, quick break, and we'll be back in just a second to talk about Elon Musk, the AfD, and German politics. We are back, and we are joined once again by Hanno Hauenstein, independent journalist based in Berlin. Hanno was with us less than a year ago to talk a little bit about the suppression of protests for Palestine in Germany. Thanks so much for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me, Emma.
So, and especially on short notice, because I hadn't anticipated Elon Musk giving a virtual speech at a German far-right party after hitting the Sieg Heil at the inauguration. We'll play this in just a second, and we'll get to Elon Musk and his role in this far-right party and in endorsing it in just a bit. But can you give us a sense of who the Alternative for Deutschland, the AfD party is, what they are? And, I mean, today is Holocaust Remembrance Day. So... Right. This has, very significant implications. The fact that this far-right party has started to become a legitimate threat.
Absolutely. I just want to pick up on that for just a second, since you mentioned it. Today is Holocaust Remembrance Day, and today it couldn't be like more on the nose. Alice Weidel, one of the co-leaders of the AfD, and Elon Musk are meeting together with Olaf Scholz, the still incumbent Prime Minister of Germany, and other ministers, the Chancellor, in a meeting organized by Axel Springer, which just tells you the extent to which I think there is a lack of urgency with some of the established legacy media outlets on what is like the moment that we're hitting right now in this direction. But to pick up on your question, like what is the history of the AfD and like where does it come from? It was basically founded a little over 10 years ago in 2013 as this kind of like Eurosceptic party, arguing against the European Union and kind of advocating for Germany to leave the EU. But over the years, it pretty quickly pivoted to more like nationalist, nativists, also outright kind of racist narratives, especially during and after the so-called refugee crisis in Germany. Germany took in like close to 1 million refugees who fled Syria and other Arab countries, and during that time, and the AfD really capitalized on some of the fears that were existing and growing in Germany, specifically in those years. And I think what's important to know is that like it really. The strongest support for the AfD lies in the east of Germany, because it has really managed successfully to kind of foster those economic frustrations of people who live in these countries like Thuringia and Saxony-Anhalt. and also the lingering distrust like towards like established institutions, and like in the past like reunification era, like after 89 when the Berlin Wall came down, like a lot of people were like economically very bad, not well off as opposed to the west of the country, and that really created this fertile ground for a party like the far right AfD to kind of like to capitalize on racism basically, and like fear mongering. So that's kind of like the background from how the AfD has transformed from this kind of like niche anti-Euro kind of obscure party into like a really successful model of like far right policies in Germany today.
And you mentioned Thuringia. I believe I read that they won a state election there in September or early, I guess, so 2024, late 2024. Right. And that's the first time that a far-right party has won a state election in Germany since the Second World War. Right. That feels very significant. Can you speak a little bit more about those economic conditions and what Germany is facing that kind of left a vacuum for this far-right party to gain traction?
Well, for like the past years, the leading coalition was like the so-called traffic light coalition. We always like name those coalitions by like by colors, because it's like the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the neoliberal FDP party. They formed this coalition, which basically collapsed back in November due to a few factors I won't go into too much detail on, but like it's the main thing was like internal disagreements on economic measures like public spending and climate questions. But that's basically where the vacuum emerged, and the AfD just like positioned itself as like a party advocating for kind of austerity dogmatism, and also like pretty much like racist messaging, like anti-immigrant messaging, and kind of Germany first, so to speak, was the approach. And it's the question why it has been so successful in doing so. I think it's like just really managed to fuel like some of the dissatisfaction that has been growing over the past years, but really in coalition with established media outlets, especially on the part of Axel Springer, that have really helped, I think, this kind of right-wing drift that we're seeing. We're seeing it all over Europe, but like in Germany, it's really feasible right now. And I think, in a way, my personal argument would be that the AfD has its own rhetorics, but like I think the established parties in Germany have also kind of failed to provide like a different vision, right? I mean, like their version of like trying to weaken this kind of like right-wing emergence and right-wing drift was basically to kind of accommodate the talking points by the AfD, these anti-migrant, anti-immigrant talking points.
This sounds very familiar.
Yeah, I can imagine. Like I often think of like what's happening in the US when I see Germany right now. It's unfortunately there's a lot of like similarities and parallels, right? Like so there were like knife attacks in two German cities over the past months, one in Solingen and the other one in Aschaffenburg, and both were committed by like non-ethnic Germans. And in the wake of that, like all of the established parties, basically from the SPD to the main opposition party, the CDU, and the Greens, they've kind of been framing, deportations and stricter regulations on migration as like effective security measures, which, again, as you say, is very resonant if you look at how Trump is talking today, especially last week since the inauguration. Like it's just like pretty much the same type of rhetoric that doesn't effectively first of all, there's no statistical rationale. There's no like proof to back up this thesis. That's one part of it. But the second part of it is that it doesn't help to weaken the far right, because people always want the original. Like right. it effectively just strengthens them. And right now the AfD is looking at like consistent 20% in the polls, maybe more. It's going a little bit up and down over the past months, but like this is basically where it's at. It's the second biggest party in the polls for projected for these elections, which are in less than a month. And it's like a real concern that like it already today, like the AfD has been, no matter what result they're actually gonna get, they have already helped like normalize this kind of part of this like extremist rhetoric. And in Germany there is this thing of like we call this Brandmauer, like a kind of a firewall norm in established party politics, that like basically none of the established parties will do like official business with the AfD. But this is kind of like seeing cracks right now. Like Friedrich Merz, the opposition leader of the CDU party, who's very likely going to be the next chancellor, has already announced just a few days ago that he's willing to kind of work with any party out there to discuss like the need for limiting migration, limiting asylum for asylum seekers, some of which is actually written into the German constitution. So like these are all, grave questions, like if that is even constitutional, what is asked for there. But like it just feels right now like a really important moment where people should be very aware that like this is like can be a real problem. I don't think that any of the established parties are going to form a coalition with the AfD on the national federal level. But we're already seeing cracks in this kind of like firewall on the state level and the regional level. So that's I think that's something we're gonna see more in the next.
I mean, just the fact that you mentioned here in the United States, the far right movement driven by anti-immigration sentiment. It's the same in Germany, Italy. I mean, and then in the UK, this is also a situation where liberals and Labour Party, they are completely incapable of meeting this moment to fight really the creeping rise of fascism. It's just that liberalism has really never been more lacking in its power, frankly, in some of these Western elections. And what's so scary is, as we said, today is Holocaust Remembrance Day, but the way that this fascism is taking hold here, or far-right politics, the anti-immigrant sentiment I mentioned, anti-Muslim sentiment in particular in Europe as well, but also this AfD party is critical of Germany's politics of remembrance. So can you talk a little bit about what that looks like in practice in German politics? Because, Holocaust denial is illegal in Germany, but this AfD party creeps up to the line quite a bit in order to dog whistle to those same folks.
100%. I think, over the AfD has different fractions within it. There is like kind of the moderate far right and the extreme far right, and like this would be too kind of like in depth to go into right now. But there's one politician that really symbolizes the very extreme branch of the far right of the AfD that has been, by constitutional courts have argued that like it would be legal to call him a fascist, which is says something in Germany. His name is Björn Höcke, and he has called the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin a symbol of shame. Basically, I'm like roughly translating from the top of my head right now, but like that's the messaging that's right there. And this is certainly breaking taboos with which shouldn't be broken in Germany, in my view. And like I think a lot of people are recognizing this, but like there has been a steady attempt from within this party to message in this direction. At the same time, what we see is like a lot of, the AfD is really not hiding their racism, but they have also increasingly dog whistled in the direction of like, all these kind of tropes of globalists in Brussels kind of controlling the economy and world policies. It's a lot of anti-Semitic dog whistling.
Which is interesting because like of all of the countries that is going to complain about the EU, Germany should probably be last on the list. It's kind of rigged in your guys' favor.
I would argue the same thing, but like that's apparently this rhetoric works for some people still. But like coming back to your point about the kind of critique of memory politics. It's interesting, like just I'm sure we're going to talk about Elon Musk as well, and we'll
play that in once you're done. Well, you want to just play it right now because I think it gives us a good framework. Because he's right. So this freak, the richest man on the planet, spoke virtually at an AfD rally right after doing what Nazis are perceiving as a neo-Nazi salute on the stage of the inauguration in the same week as he's making Holocaust jokes on Twitter after he did what very much looked like a Nazi salute at the inauguration. And then he goes and virtually speaks at an AfD rally, this far-right party in Germany. This is what he had to say.
So, I think there's frankly too much of a focus on past guilt, and we need to move beyond that. Children should not be guilty of the sins of their parents, or even let alone their parents, their great grandparents, maybe even. And we should be optimistic and excited about a future for Germany. And that's really my message: is be optimistic, excited, and preserve German culture and protect the German people. And and there's some other things that I think would be very helpful too, which is I think you want more self-determination for Germany and for the countries in Europe, and less from Brussels. That's my opinion. I think there's too much bureaucracy from Brussels, too much control from sort of global elite, and when I've given talks at these sort of global government conferences, what I've said is there should be less global government. There should be more determination by individual countries. So I very much hope that the AfD does well, and that Alice Beadle does become chancellor. I think that would be very good for Germany. And I think it's very important. I hope that German people unite and strongly support AfD. Go.
Okay, so there we had it. He hit all the dog whistles there. The global elites.
Right.
We preserve German culture. Past guilt. Now, I guess it's a good way to talk about how, the politics of remembrance, again, of the Holocaust, of the fact that it is illegal to deny the Holocaust in Germany. They are criticizing the fact that there is baggage for Germany having committed the Holocaust, and we will renew your nationalist feelings about Germany, and don't worry so much about one of the worst crimes committed in the history of humanity. Let's not think too hard about that.
Right. Well, over the years, the AfD has really deepened its ties with real far right extremist groups, and I think it just speaks to their kind of continuous radicalization of the past years. And speaking about Elon Musk, as you well know, he is very much inserted himself on the global stage in the US, but also in Europe, and specifically in Germany, as we just saw. He's on X, on his platform. He's been flooring far-right influencers like Nomi Zeibt, who's pretty well known for kind of spreading all sorts of conspiratorial worldviews and narratives, like the Great Replacement theory, the fact that we're supposedly overrun by immigrants that are then going to replace the white race, all this kind of stuff. His consistent anti-trans messaging, his pro-natalist messaging, and I think all of these things are very resonant with what the AfD is messaging towards as well. And after Musk, this kind of flirt with the AfD that pivoted in the clip we just saw. This started in a tweet where he said basically that only the AfD can save Germany. Why he did that, I think personally, I think Musk is like a kind of an erratic character, and it's not. I mean, it aligns with his policies and like his worldview right now. But like, some people are speculating that there's some broader kind of strategy there that he might want to destabilize Germany in order to profit from that, like to kind of weaken the euro. But I'm not sure if that's true. It's basically,
he does build, a lot of SUVs in Germany, so that's part of it. But I also just think some of this is just ideology from a guy. He makes it pretty clear is when the richest man on earth starts talking about global elites. Like, no, you're the global elite. So when you say elites, you mean globalists in the anti-Semitic sense.
Right. Yeah, well, it's like it's quite telling. It's quite telling indeed. And like the tweet on X where he kind of like claimed that only the AfD can save Germany was quickly followed up in an op-ed in Die Welt, an Axel Springer outlet, which Axel Springer, again, Europe's biggest publisher, the owner of Politico, the publisher that publishes the biggest newspaper in Germany. So there's a real in-depth complicity here on part of like established legacy German media outlets that could very well say, no, we don't give this man a platform to endorse a fascist party, but chose to do the opposite. So this was followed up on like a public conversation between Musk and Alice Weidel that lasted for about an hour, in which honestly Weidel made some pretty bizarre and historically false claims, such as, to give you just a few of the highlights, that Adolf Hitler was supposedly a communist because he nationalized things, or that supposedly like the leftish Palestinians, as she framed it, were like the true heirs of like anti-Semitism, because they criticized Israel after October 7th for Israel's onslaught on Gaza. And I think all of these things are very telling for where the discourse is going right now. Like the Hitler remarks were so obviously untrue that like it actually sparked a little bit of backlash in Germany. But I think when it comes to the other question, for example, about like how supposedly Palestinians on the left are the only ones to blame for anti-Semitism, is that actually reflects like a broader sentiment in Germany right now, where like these kind of notions are shared by kind of like a broader mainstream, and they're effectively helping the AfD kind of to hide their own anti-Semitism. What we spoke about earlier, the kind of like rhetoric of like global elites controlling the economy and whatnot, and kind of discriminating against minorities like Palestinians, which there are a lot of in Germany, by the way, which is another discussion we could have at another time. But yeah.
Well, I mean, I am curious as to how those politics are manifesting themselves, in the sense of when we had you on 10 months ago, it was about the nature of Germany's support for Israel and how there is this outsourcing of collective guilt from the nation for committing the Holocaust into the settler colonial project of Israel. Like, how are the liberals kind of greasing the runway? I think I'm mixing some metaphors here, but making it easier for the AfD and the right to launder their own anti-Semitism.
I think, in Germany, there's something that the Germans refer to as Staatsräson, the raison d'etat, like Germany's kind of like reason of state, which is to almost unconditionally support Israel, which is something that has manifested one-on-one over the past 15 months in this like genocidal war in Gaza, where we've seen that Germany has supported Israel militarily, symbolically, rhetorically, on pretty much every level you could possibly imagine. And it has repeatedly, on an institutional level, within the courts, within the police, on the streets, but also on the part of like major politicians, like critics of Israel's policies have repeatedly been denounced as supposedly anti-Semitic, when in fact they were voicing statements that are pretty much consistent with what all human rights groups who working on that issue are saying, such as things like, that Israel is committing apartheid in the occupied territories. Such statements have been called anti-Semitic time and again, and I think that has really helped actually the AfD as an entry ticket to mainstream discourse, because that's exactly what they're saying. Like, Palestinians and leftists who criticize Israel are the real anti-Semites, and we aren't. I mean, that's the AfD's main kind of like one of the main kind of talking points at the moment. And I think like the failure on part of the German, I don't want to be too generalizing here, but like, there was a big scandal. There are so many scandals about like anti-Semitism on the left or on part of Palestinians that it's hard to even know where to begin. But for example, on Berlinale, like the big film festival, like the now Oscar-nominated film No Other Land, these two protagonists, they basically spoke out against apartheid and against the war in Gaza, and were denounced as anti-Semitic by the mayor of Berlin and by the justice minister of Germany. And like, these kind of things happen time and again. And I think it fails to recognize the real threat of anti-Semitism. It actually conceals the fact that there is real growing anti-Semitism, such as the one we see on the part of the AfD, and it like externalizes it to minorities.
And so in the end, you can just basically blame minorities and largely Muslim immigrants in Europe, which is really, at the end of the day, what the AfD and the right wing was already doing in the first place. It's very convenient, right?
Sure.
Because it's the minorities are taking your jobs, and they're also the real anti-Semites.
Exactly. It's quote unquote imported anti-Semitism. So like in Germany, anti-Semitism is, according to the way it is often discussed in the public sphere, it's no longer homegrown, it's actually imported. And like, there was a resolution passed by the Bundestag against anti-Semitism. And again, I'm not Jewish. I'm very much against this type. I think anti-Semitism exists in Germany. It is a real problem, but I think it's at the same time, this resolution that was passed on anti-Semitism just a few months ago, it like named a few examples of anti-Semitism, and it referenced Berlinale, what I just told you about, where what happened on Berlinale was really everything but anti-Semitic. But it didn't reference something like Halle, where a city in Germany where about 5 years ago a right-wing neo-Nazi attempted to storm a synagogue and like basically just kill people. And like he killed a few people because he didn't manage to get into the synagogue. But like it's quite remarkable the extent to which there seems to be a bit of a confusion on this topic in Germany, like this, and I think the AfD has been very smart actually in capitalizing on that sense of confusion, and as you said, basically easily blame the others.
Well, Netanyahu, by the way, says this kind of thing all the time, where he says this complete falsity that Hitler got the idea of exterminating the Jews from the Palestinian Grand Mufti at the time. That is just a way to justify dehumanizing Palestinians and absolve the German fascist movement of its responsibility, which you can see like in the form of this party that is intoxicating to people, finding someone else to blame and not internalizing shame. That's what they're selling.
I agree. And, like, I think the current interpretation of Zionism by this specific government that is like so hardcore ethno-nationalist and racist and anti-Palestinian is in many ways also like an inspiration for a party such as the AfD. And, I think the other established parties would do well in kind of understanding that, like, supporting a government like the current one that has committed these atrocities in Gaza over the past months and is increasingly annexing the West Bank and whatnot is not actually helping a version of historic responsibility that has nothing to do with that. It actually would mean a bunch of other things that you don't tick the box by just agreeing to this type of government.
Well, Hanno Hauenstein, independent journalist based in Berlin, thanks so much for coming on the show today and explaining this to us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on anytime.
Thank you. All right, folks, with that, we're going to wrap up the free part of this program and head into the fun half, where we will take your calls and read your IMs and play some clips. This show relies on your support. Join themajorityreport.com because, look, we got these tech oligarchs who can decide on a whim if they're going to demonetize us and say, I don't know.
Yeah. I keep forgetting not to antagonize them. Like I just told the Zynga guy who wants to deport people for burning flags to get his ass back to work on Farmville 4. And I'm like, damn, every time I do this, like quote tweet one of these guys and it goes semi-viral, it's like, oh, how much money does he have to just hire people to look into us?
Yeah, right. That is the concern. So you can insulate us from those kind of anxieties, at least to some extent, by becoming a member. Join themajorityreport.com. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning? Speaking of your antagonism.
Yeah, Left Reckoning, we have a big show coming up this weekend. Grace Blakely on. We have actually 3 guests. I'm not even going to try to do all 3 guests. Over this weekend, David Griscom, patreon.com/Left Reckoning. We had a conversation on organizing the global fishing industry, which is not great for workers, turns out. So check that out, patreon.com/Left Reckoning.
And on ESPN today, of course, we're going to be talking about the NFC and AFC championships. So womp womp, we get a rematch of the Eagles and the Chiefs. But I'm all aboard the Chiefs Kingdom train now, so I'm wearing red today. That was actually just an accident. But can Mahomes three-peat? We will talk about it all. YouTube.com/ESPN show. Okay, the number is 646-257-3920. After the break, we will open up the phone lines. See you on the other side.
Okay, Emma, please.
Well, I feel that my voice is sorely lacking on the Majority Report.
Wait, look, Sam is unpopular.
I do deserve a vacation at Disney World. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome Emma to the show.
It is Thursday.
I think you need to take over for Sam.
Yes, please.
No. I'm gonna pause you right there.
Wait, what?
You can't encourage Emma to live like this. And I'll tell you why. She was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. She was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
What?
Tour, sushi, and poker.
Tim's upset?
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. She was offered a tour, sushi, and...
that's what we call it in the biz.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Right.
Tour, sushi, and poker.
We're gonna get demonetized.
I just think that what you did to Tim Pool was mean.
Free speech.
That's not what we're about here. Look at how sad he's become now. We shouldn't even talk about it because I think you're responsible.
I probably am in a certain way, but let's get to the meltdown here.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Oh my God.
Tour,
wow.
Sushi.
I'm sorry, I'm losing my fucking mind.
She was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Logic.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Boy. Tour.
I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid.
Tour.
I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid.
Had this debate 7,000 times.
A little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid.
Tour. I'm losing my fucking mind.
Some people just don't understand.
So I'm not trying to be a dick right now, but like I absolutely think the U.S. should be providing me with a wife and kids.
That's